Hello and welcome to Sip Sip Hooray, the podcast where we go behind the label to share the inside stories of your favorite wineries and some new discoveries too. On today's show, we're going for the dirt, the good, clean, organic stuff that is the foundation of a favorite winery on California's Central Coast. Tablas Creek in Paso Robles was the first winery in the United States to earn ROC, or Regenerative Organic Certified status. That means they come up clean and a shining model for others when it comes to farming, specifically soil health, animal welfare, and farm worker fairness. Taking care of the land, its creatures, and their workers has been standard operating procedure for Tablas Creek since its founding in 1989. We are delighted to welcome back Jason Haas to Sip Sip Hooray. He is the second-generation proprietor of Tablas Creek and a smart, fun, down-to-earth guy. We are the two Marys who like to eat, drink, and be merry. I'm Mary Babbitt.
And I'm Mary Orland. Some call it beyond organic, some call it carbon farming, or reducing carbon emissions while improving wine flavor, or agroecology. By whatever name, Jason and the folks at Tablas Creek decided that pursuing regenerative agriculture for their vineyards was important. With the annual Earth Day celebrations approaching, bringing a focus on farming, we're so happy to have Jason back on the pod to break down the philosophy of regenerative grape farming, why it is important, what it means to the wine world, and how it shows up in your glass. Jason, welcome back to Sip Sip Hooray.
Thank you, Marys.
It's great to have you back, Jason, and we thank you for helping us understand regenerative farming better and why you guys are invested in it for Tablas Creek. So could you kind of roll back, to when you first started doing this and what that looks like for a winery like Tablas Creek?
Sure. I think that the best way to explain it often is to contrast it with some things that maybe people know better. So we've been organic since our inception in 1989. And we were organic because of this belief that really that was the best way to grow grapes and to make wines that tasted as intensely as possible of the place in which they were grown. So we inherit this from our French partners. Tablas Creek is co-founded by the Perrin family from Chateau de Beaucastel, and they've been fully organic since the 1950s. And they are a real believer that organic farming is an emphasizer for terroir, for that somewhereness that makes great wines distinctive. So that was our starting point. And we realized little by little that if that is right, and we do believe that it's right, that the way that organic farming is so often practiced in California didn't go as far as we wanted towards really emphasizing that character of place. And the reason is that a lot of traditional organic farming, it actually looks a little more like chemical farming than people might expect. You might not be spraying with a chemical systemic pesticide, but you're still probably spraying with oils or soaps. You might not be putting petrochemical fertilizer on your land, but you're probably bringing in organic fertilizer because you have a monoculture and you're trying to make sure that there's fertility. So it was in this push that we started in the mid-2000s to try to eliminate all of our outside inputs that we ended up kind of moving towards what would become known as regenerative farming. So let me give you a couple of examples. Mm-hmm. So we thought, it's great to bring in organic fertilizer. It's way better for the world than chemical fertilizer. But wouldn't it be better to create our own fertility through rotating cover crops, through integrating our own flock of sheep to make manure and therefore fertility with our own weeds rather than having to bring in fertilizer from the outside? So, okay, great. So we got our first flock of sheep. We thought, wouldn't it be better to obviate the need to do any sort of spraying for pests by creating habitat that would attract beneficial insects that would control the pests that you didn't want? Yeah, that made sense to us also. And wouldn't it be better to control any issues with weeds by instead planting the things that we wanted and leaving their roots in the ground to hold the soil in place rather than having to till to uproot the things that just happened to show up that we didn't want. So those are sort of the three of the central questions that you have to answer if you're going to be however you're going to be farming. But if you're going to be farming organically, and then if you're moving from organic to biodynamic or regenerative farming, you have to figure out how to do weed control, pest control, and fertilization in a way which is consistent with the goals of your farm.
Sure. And this is a process that takes a while. If I'm correct in saying you all actually started the conversion to regenerative farming in 2010.
Yeah, we started farming 20 acres biodynamically in 2010.
Okay.
And we had been incorporating a lot of biodynamic techniques before that. We'd been cover cropping, we'd been using compost tea. But we decided to go kind of full bore and take a 20-acre slice of the vineyard and farm it fully biodynamically.
Mm-hmm.
And we were expecting the benefits to be long-term benefits, that we would give our grapevines a little easier life in this high-stress climate that is Paso Robles by having more organic matter, having the soils able to hold more moisture. And we thought that the quality gains would come in the long term because maybe our vines would live 50, 60, 70 years instead of having to be replaced at 25 years because they were exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And to our surprise, we saw a significant and widespread jump in the quality that we got off of those 20 acres that very first year.
Really? Wow.
And this came out of our blending trials. The way that we put our wines together, everything is picked separately and fermented separately and kept separate for the first 6 months after harvest. And then in the spring, we go in and taste blind all of the different lots that we produced the harvest before. And we give them grades. And the reason we do it blind is that we don't want to be influenced by which block it came from, what that block was like the year before, whether or not there were issues that we know about. Like, we don't want to know any of that. We just want to evaluate what's in the glass. It wasn't until after the blending session was over and we'd chosen the wines that our assistant winemaker came to us and said, "Hey, I cross-referenced the grades that we got this year and last year versus the blocks that they came from. And if you look, the wines that came from that biodynamic block, like, they all scored better than they did the year before."
Isn't that something?
And for us, we were like, we didn't expect that. It's great. Let's see if it happens again. And we saw the same improvement in those blocks the next year, and then decided to double the number of acres we were farming biodynamically in 2012 from 20 acres to 40 acres, and saw another leap in quality from those 20 acres that were converted in 2012. And so that really sold us on the whole idea.
So doing that, making that kind of conversion, was it a lot more work for your team? And if it is, the additional labor or the additional effort, is it offset by increased sales because it tastes better? Or, I mean, I know that it's altruistic and the right thing to do for the earth, but does it all pencil out for a winery?
It's a great question. And the way that I usually answer it is, you do offset some of your additional costs by the things that you are no longer buying. So if you think that you are creating this habitat that is producing the fertility and the biodiversity that you need, you're not buying fertilizer. We haven't bought fertilizer for a decade to bring in onto the property, and our soil fertility levels and organic matter levels are the best that they've ever been. And if you're comparing it to chemical farming, and that's not where we were coming from, but those chemical products, those have real costs too. Monsanto is not in business for your good. I mean, they are they are definitely making money on the products that they're selling to farmers. So you do offset some of the input costs, or rather, you do offset some of the additional labor costs with lower input costs.
Sure.
But it is still somewhat more expensive because you have to be out there more. You are doing things that can't really be mechanized. You're interplanting different species. You are moving animals around from block to block. Um, you're doing things that require hand labor. But in terms of how much more expensive it is, we certainly didn't find it to be cripplingly more expensive. I mean, you think of how expensive Tablas Creek wines are. Our estate wines are sell for between $35 and $70. So could you do this for a $10 bottle of wine? I think it would be really hard. But
Mhm.
I don't have a ton of sympathy for wineries that sell their wine for 50, 75, $100 and think that this kind of farming is somehow out of reach.
Interesting. So Tablas Creek was approached to be in the pilot program for the regenerative organic certification by an organization called the Regenerative Organic Alliance in 2019. How did you all become the one winery that was selected to participate?
So it came out of a dinner that our director of winemaking, Neil Collins, hosted in Ventura. Because of the flock of sheep that we started in 2012, we ended up producing lamb that we partnered with about a dozen local restaurants so that they would serve Tablas Creek lamb on their menus. And one of them, Paradise Pantry down in Ventura, invited Neil to come down to host a Tablas Creek lamb and Tablas Creek wine dinner. And he did, and one of the people who came to the dinner was Yvon Chouinard, the kind of legendary
Oh,
founder
yeah.
of Patagonia.
Patagonia, sure.
And Patagonia had just been one of the driving force behind launching the Regenerative Organic Alliance, because they wanted to create a certification program that they could use to certify that their supply chain was farming in a way that was consistent with their company values in terms of making products that were good for the earth, good for the people who made them, good for the communities that they were a part of. And so I guess Yvonne buttonholed Neil during the dinner and basically peppered him with questions about farming. And so he came back and talked to me. He's like, that was an interesting experience. But we didn't think that anything in particular would come out of it until a few months later when we got a call from the Regenerative Organic Alliance saying that they had a winery partner who was originally going to be the one vineyard and winery to be a part of the initial pilot program, and they had to drop out. And would we be interested in stepping in? And I'm sure that it was because of that dinner.
Wow.
And what has that meant for you, stepping in and being the spokesperson, the example?
It's been an incredible experience.
Has it?
There are lots of advantages to being the first to do something. There are also challenges to being the first to do something. And I don't want to gloss over those. But just the fact that we were able to be the pioneers in kind of putting a name to the kind of farming that we were largely already doing has meant that we've had visits from hundreds of other vineyards to come and learn what we're doing here. It's meant that we've had great stories written about our farming in terrific magazines and newspapers. And it's like we've always tried to be leaders within our community and share what we've learned and what we've discovered. And this was, I think, the highest profile opportunity for us to do this.
Absolutely. And then also you're on Sip Sip Hooray, dude.
and awesome podcasts.
That's so great. So this organization also awards certifications. Tell us what it took to be certified, and you are the only gold certified winery in the state of California. And there's another winery in Southern Washington State, Troon Vineyard, that is also gold certified. But tell us what it took to get that and what that means.
Yeah, so they're actually in Southern Oregon, not Southern Washington.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
They're a great winery. So I'm not sure how helpful it is in the bigger picture to focus all that much on the different tiers of the regenerative organic certification. They've got 3 tiers. They have bronze and silver and gold. And it is really hard to get to the gold tier. Like, as you mentioned, like there are only 2 of us who've done it. But it is almost as hard to get to the silver tier. So I think if I were the Regenerative Organic Alliance, I don't know that I would have those tiers. It would just be like an organic certification. You either have it or you don't.
Sure.
But the biggest difference is that at the gold tier, there can't be any of the major pieces that they care about that you're still working towards, but you have to have achieved all of it. So that means that you have to be paying a living wage to every farm worker who walks onto your property for even a single day. You have to pay a living wage per hour based on where you are. It means that you have to have moved fully away from tilling, except in some very specific circumstances. It means that you have to have their highest level of animal welfare certification. You have to no longer be building the carbon content and organic matter and microbial activity in your soil. You have to be above the threshold for their highest level of certification. So it's essentially like there's no passes for being in the process of things to get to the gold level. But again, I think that the regenerative organic certification as a whole is it is a really high bar. And that's one of the reasons why we found it appealing. Because we were already organic certified, we were already biodynamic certified. And then there's these sustainability certifications that are out there. And I think it might be helpful for me to talk a little bit about why, given these other certifications, we felt like that ROC model was something that was worth pursuing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go for it. Tell us.
Because I'm sure it's confusing for consumers. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Sustainable versus organic.
Totally.
Versus
Yeah.
This. Yeah.
Totally.
Natural, right?
So I think that the power of an organic certification is its simplicity. It's basically a list of chemicals that you cannot use. So you have to figure out, again, how to do weed control, pest control, and fertilization without these chemical inputs. And if you work without those chemical inputs, and you go through an audit, you can get your organic certification. However, it's a narrow focus. It doesn't talk at all about how you treat your people. It doesn't talk at all about how you use your resources. It doesn't talk at all about the results of your work. It's entirely process based. So you could be flood irrigating a water intensive crop in a desert climate and mistreating your workers. And as long as you aren't using chemicals, you can be organic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that felt like a blind spot. Again, it's a good thing. Wineries, farms that are organic certified should be commended for doing it. It's a good thing for the world that these chemicals are not out there in circulation. But it always felt a little incomplete to us. Biodynamics is, in a lot of ways, it's a much more comprehensive look at how to build a great farm. It's a holistic set of protocols that were laid out by an Austrian philosopher 100 years ago that encouraged biodiversity and plant life and required the elimination of chemicals, and essentially was this idea of a whole farm approach. And that was a great, I think, step forward for its era. But the downsides of biodynamics for me have always been that because it's a product of something that was written 100 years ago, a lot of the justifications just weren't known at the time. People didn't know what was going on. They didn't know the microbial life under the soil. They didn't know the importance of fungal networks. They didn't know what was really happening. And so if you read the biodynamic literature, it's all about, like, you do this and it will activate cosmic forces that will help your grapevines have the motivation to succeed. Like, it's
there's like a little woo-woo factor.
Oh, there's so much woo-woo factor. And so it's sort of hopelessly unscientific. Like, it works, but it's hopelessly unscientific.
Yeah.
And it also has this blind spot in terms of resource use. There are a lot of biodynamic farms that are incredibly intensive users of water. So it was not really a concern. Resource scarcity was not a concern 100 years ago. So, and then there are sustainability certifications which point out, and I think rightly, they point out that being a good a good neighbor and a good business is more than just what you do to your soil. It has to do with things like how you use resources, how much of your power comes from regenerative or renewable sources. What do you have habitat that's unused that's instead used for wildlife? What are the weights of the bottles that you use? Um, how do you treat animals who are working on your farm? Like all of these things that are important and good and kind of outside the scope of organic and biodynamics. But if there is a weakness of the sustainability certifications, it's that the bar to get into them is pretty low. And they intentionally set that bar low because they want as many farms as possible inside, and then they demand continuous improvement. But the fact that you can use Roundup and be a part of a sustainability certification has always, for me, felt like, okay, that's a bar that you should force everyone to clear.
Sure. Yeah.
Not asking too much, is it?
I mean, it's not. And that I think a lot of the sustainability certifications, like the bar is low enough that there's a legitimate critique that it's basically greenwashing.
Yeah.
So the thing that we loved about the regenerative organic certification is that it is a high bar that also has the breadth of the best of the sustainability certification. So you have to have an organic certification to proceed. So if you're not organic to start with, like you can't become regenerative organic. So like you have to have eliminated all of those synthetic chemicals. Then it has a lot of the same protocols and approach, whole farm approach taken from biodynamics. And in fact, a lot of the practices are straight out of biodynamics, but it has provided the scientific background for why it works, and it leaves behind some of the non-scientific pieces of biodynamics, like the biodynamic calendar, where you're supposed to prune based on what phase the moon is in, because theoretically sap is rising. I mean, these are things that are really, they don't really have good scientific backing. So those are left behind, but instead the scientific basis behind soil networks and microbial activity and enzymatic activity and organic matter in the soil, all of that kind of stuff is core. You have to be measuring and showing that what you're doing is improving these measurable pieces. And then it incorporates three other pillars that are outside of just the soil health pillar that organics and biodynamics mostly focus on. There's a resource use pillar, so you have to be working to wean yourself off of shared resources like groundwater and non-renewable energy. That's super important. That's something that we are all realizing, that the future of farming is going to be a future which is going to be increased competition for resources and relying on things that other people are also going to be relying on is probably not a great long-term plan. And then there's an animal welfare plan. So you have to go through an animal welfare audit if you have working animals on your farm. If you are harvesting them, that has to be done humanely or using best practices. And then finally, there's a farm worker fairness piece where you have to be paying your farm workers a living wage. You have to show that their working conditions are safe and that you're continuing to invest in their skills. So together, that like farming soil health piece, the resource use piece, the animal welfare piece, and the farm worker fairness piece felt to us like it was so comprehensive and also rigorous that it was worth going through an extra certification.
It's super admirable. And I read that you said that the farm worker fairness piece was really meaningful for Tablas Creek. And can you explain that to us?
Yeah, it was. And I mean, we've been proud of the way that we treated our team. I mean, we have paid them well. We've given our field crew year-round employment since 1996, like a long time ago. But it was still kind of a hierarchical system, just because that's the way it had always been and the way it had developed. So our director of winemaking and our viticulturist would decide what they wanted to do. They would talk to our vineyard manager, who had been in charge of the crew here since 1992, and he would tell the crew what we wanted. They would go and do it, and then when they were done, we would have another directive for them. And one of the things that we were required to do as part of the farm worker fairness certification was to do essentially a team building exercise with that vineyard crew and institute these regular meetings every couple of weeks where we would talk through what we had done, explain why we had done them, get feedback from everybody in the room, and then talk through what we were going to be doing. And like, it doesn't seem like a huge change from what we were doing, but the impacts were pretty dramatic. Like, one of them was that like our tractors stopped breaking. And it wasn't like people had been trying to break the tractors before that. It was that there just were not the open communication channels that when something started sounding a little funny, the guy who was driving the tractor felt like he could go to the viticulturist and say, hey, you might want to get that tractor checked out. There's something going on with the front wheel. Instead, it would break, and then we would hear about it from the vineyard manager, and then we would fix it. The other thing that I thought was really fascinating was that these guys, who in many cases had been working here for decades, started bringing their families out on weekends to show them what they were working on.
Oh, yeah? Wow.
And so it was just this extra level of, I think, understanding of why they were doing the things that they were doing, and also just investment in their role in helping direct it as well as execute it, that just felt like got this extra level of excitement and buy-in from the crew whose boots were on the ground and hands were on the vines every day.
Well, absolutely, because they're the ones who are going to identify a problem as it starts to develop. Other people at the winery who are not in the field every day may not be aware of it. So that's really interesting that you're seeing that.
It really was interesting because, again, I don't think it's something that we would necessarily have predicted.
Yeah.
Because when we were just sort of looking at our own practices, we were like, oh, we're doing great with this. But it turns out that like we could have been doing better, and learning what that was and seeing the impact has been, I think, one of the most interesting pieces for all of us.
And I'm sure it empowers the folks who are doing the work day to day, that their expertise, their opinions matter.
100%.
Jason, are a lot of other wineries following your lead, or are you guys still among the few, the proud?
We are certainly among the proud. But in terms of how many other wineries, I think there are now 39 wineries that have gotten this certification, including the first one in France just a few months ago, first one in Australia just a few months ago. They're still mostly in California. There is a nice little nexus here in Paso Robles, not just us, but also the team at Via Creek Cellars and at Booker Vineyards and at Robert Hall, who are very involved in the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation and kicked off this cool initiative called the One Block Challenge, where they're essentially challenging growers to convert a single block to regenerative farming. And they have been doing this themselves for 6 or 7 years and have all this great data that they've developed that they share as it's a great resource. And then we found out that our neighbors at Halter Ranch, right across the street from us, just got their regenerative organic certification. So there's 5 here in Paso. Wow. Now there's another nexus up in Napa, and then they're kind of scattered around. There's a couple in Oregon, there's a few in Sonoma, there's a few in Santa Barbara County, there's a few elsewhere in California. So it's growing. It's still a relatively small movement, and it's a lot of the people who, like us, came out of the biodynamic movement because we were already doing most of the stuff that needed to be done. It's not like we were converting from like conventional chemical farming to regenerative organic in one swoop. So it's growing. It's there, and I know that there are at least as many wineries who are in the application process as who have already gotten the ROC certification. So I hope to see it continue to grow. And it's also important to note that this is not a wine-specific certification. There are separate regenerative organic protocols for everything from livestock to orchards to row crops to chocolate to aquaculture.
Oh, that's great.
And they have certified, the last figure that I saw is that they've certified 18 million acres worldwide regenerative organic. A lot of that ranch land, But still, like how cool is that it can go from nothing to 18 million acres in 6 years?
Sure. Well,
Incredible.
in doing my research for this, I read that there's more than 200 U.S. wineries in the pipeline to become certified regenerative organic, or at least maybe not organic, but there's other programs, certified regenerative and regenified, that don't require the organic certification prior to getting the regenerative certification. But it seems like, at least the research that I saw, there were at least 15 wineries in the regenerative organic certified program trying to get certified. But it's interesting that there's 5 or so wineries in Paso Robles, which makes me wonder, what is it about the Paso Robles community? Because I have noticed this, that there has been I see more of a push from Paso wineries to follow these steps or programs to really focus on not just the farming, but on the big picture, if you will. What is it? What do you think? Paso Robles is a center for that.
It's a really good question. I think there's a couple of things that I would attribute that to. One is that it's a pretty tight and pretty interconnected and pretty open community. So there's really nothing kind of turf related. Like people are not protective of, oh, we've done this, we don't want anybody else to do it here. It's a community that really works together. So I mean, we had people coming wanting to like peer over our shoulders at what we were doing before we even got the certification. Um, so that's one part of it. I think the other part of it is that Paso is a pretty stressful environment to grow grapevines. I mean, it's very hot and dry in the summer. The
Mm-hmm.
nights are quite cold. The winters are quite cold and very wet. And all of these things are stressors on the vines. And one of the great things about regenerative farming is that it helps reduce the vine's stress levels by keeping soils cooler in the daytime heat of the summer and allowing them to retain more moisture and allowing them to have more richness in organic matter. And this helps mitigate some of the high stress environment. So I know that was a big driver behind our own exploration of it. But we're certainly not the only ones who are interested in how do you keep grapevines viable and thriving in this fairly difficult climate. So I think that probably plays into it too.
Well, you
Interesting.
sent us a couple of wines, and one of them uses a unique pruning. It was grown with a unique pruning system that, am I correct? Is that part of working with protecting grapes in the summer heat, or am I making that up?
You're talking about the Angoublé, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So that is a wine that we make entirely from dry farmed, head trained vineyard blocks. So that dry farm, for people who don't know that, dry farm just means unirrigated. So these are blocks that we planted with less density, so the vines farther apart, so they could be self-sufficient in this climate without needing irrigation.
Mhm.
And then planted farther apart, they're planted without trellises. So they
Mhm.
just have a central post that they're attached to, and then arms radiate off of that central post. And it is a farming method which is obviously lighter on its input requirements because you don't need any water. You also get a more three-dimensional growth plan than you would if you had the vines on trellises, where you take a three-dimensional plant and put it into something that's more two-dimensional. And so that three-dimensionality, it's a little easier on a grapevine. So you get longer life. You're reducing the
Hmm.
stress levels, but you also have a little more canopy in just about every direction so that you don't have some of the same issues you might with sunburn that you get
Right.
on a trellised vineyard block.
Okay,
Mhm.
good. So I wasn't entirely off base there.
No, no, you weren't. It's it for us, that wine is both a kind of nod to the past. If you look at the 100-year-old mixed, mostly Zinfandel vineyards that are still thriving around California, they're all planted this way, pretty much.
Mhm.
They're all planted untrellised, wide spaced. So
Right.
it's a little look back at California's history, but I also feel like it is the only truly sustainable way of planting a vineyard going forward, because we know that water is not going to become more available in the future, and that competition for groundwater in particular is going to be fierce. So I feel like wine grapes as a non-essential crop. I mean, we are a luxury good. We have to be thinking about how we produce what we make in a way that does not require compromises from other more essential crops. So,
So are you
so
saying
I feel
that,
like this is a part of that.
yeah, so are you saying that for future vineyards that Tablas Creek would plant, would you use Engoblet instead of the traditional, say, vertical shoot positioning trellising systems?
Correct. We have planted very little on trellis in the last 20 years. Basically, the last 20 years, almost everything that we've planted has been this wide spaced head
Okay.
trained dry farm. So if
Ah,
you looked at where we were in 2000, everything was on trellis. All 80 acres that we had planted were on trellis. Now we've got about 70 acres on trellis and 70 acres wide spaced dry farmed like this. So we're
ah.
slowly converting some of the blocks that already were on trellis to this wider spacing, and this head trained pruning or modified head trained pruning. And then almost all of the new vineyards that we've planted have followed this model.
Well, we should let our
Interesting.
listeners know that the Tablas Creek Engable is it's a blend of 5 wines, 5 varietals. Is it Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre? What else am I?
Yeah, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, Counoise, and a little bit of Tannat.
Yeah,
Yes.
and really delicious,
Yeah.
complex and yet elegant,
Mhm.
not too tannic, just really lovely.
But it
And
has
I think
this.
that's one of the things that maybe surprises people. I think they
Mhm.
sometimes would assume that this dry farmed, wide spaced vineyard blocks would make grapes that are like more powerful and more tannic and more intense. And
Mhm.
instead, we don't find that to be the case. We find that those grapes generally have more elegance and more minerality and more
Mm,
nuance to them,
that's true.
at
Mhm.
a little bit lower alcohol levels, which we love.
Yes, we do love that. Fantastic. One thing I wanted to ask you about is something else that I discovered in my research on regenerative organic certified is that um, carbon sequestration in the soil seems to be a major benefit. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something I probably should have mentioned earlier. It's one of the other things, in addition to resource scarcity, one of the other things that, again, in the world of biodynamics 100 years ago that they weren't worried about, but which we now know is something that we need to be thinking about, was carbon sequestration and climate change. So the best tool we have for carbon sequestration is plants. I mean, that's what they do. They photosynthesize and they pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they turn that carbon into carbohydrates. And those carbohydrates become the fruit that they produce. It also becomes the roots and the trunks and the leaves that they grow. And one of the goals of regenerative farming is to use these engines, these plants that are out there working to grow you things, to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil where it does good, instead of floating around in the atmosphere where it causes climate change. So you can, through thoughtful farming, increase the percentage of organic matter in your soil from, I mean, a lot of California ag land is 1% or 1.5% organic matter. And when we sent our soil samples in to get the regenerative organic certification, they came back at 5.5 to 6.5% organic matter.
Mm, okay.
And there is so much topsoil out there around the world that you could
Mhm.
undo decades of the Industrial Revolution through fixing carbon in the soil. So it's a piece of the solution. If you look at all of like the Paris Accords and or the big international climate pushes, regenerative farming is one of the tools that we have at our disposal to realistically draw down the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere.
Makes good sense.
Yeah.
You also sent us a white blend I want to talk about briefly because it is so darn delicious. And I guess what I want our listeners to know, and I'm not to be too fangirl here, but this Tablas Creek makes outstanding wines you can actually feel good about because clearly, as Jason has been explaining, they're really trying to do the right thing by the land, by their workers, by the animals that are, that work on the farms and then the vineyard. But the Esprit de Tablas is a favorite of mine, and it's a white blend and just delicious. Can you tell us what's in that one?
Yeah, so this wine has all 6 of the white grapes that are traditional to and allowed in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So it's led by Roussanne, and we love the kind of
Yes.
core like
Mhm.
richness and creaminess that Roussanne brings. And then it has Grenache Blanc, Picpoul Blanc, and then 3 obscure white varieties that really they didn't exist in America before we brought them in, and they've turned out to be kind of a revelation. So those 3 are Clairette Blanche and Picardin and Bourbelanc. And these are all kind of high acid, minerally whites that bring freshness to a blend. So,
Yes.
so that's what's in there. It's those 6 grapes led by Roussanne, but with a lot of higher acid things, giving the Roussanne brightness and freshness and emphasizing that mineral note.
It's a super fresh, super lively wine.
Mm.
And that's probably not what most people think of when they think of Rhone whites. They probably think of grapes like Viognier or
Hmm.
Roussanne or Marsanne
Right.
that tend
Yeah.
to be fairly dense, can be a little low in acid. But
Hmm.
all of the other white Rhone varieties are high acid grapes. And so
Hmm.
incorporating them allows you to do something that you couldn't do with any of those big 3 alone.
Yeah. So, Jason, how do you educate consumers, not just you personally, but Tablas Creek and the regenerative organic community, educate consumers about what regenerative organic farming is and why they should really be looking for wines that have that certification?
I honestly don't think we do enough of it. I think we should do a lot more.
Hmm.
We try as hard as we can. If you follow us on social media or the blog that we've written for almost 20 years, like we talk a lot about regenerative farming and we try to bring it out of the theoretical realm into the practical. Here's what we're doing. Here's what the results are. Here's why we think this
Hmm.
matters. Um, but there's only so much that we can do on our own, and we do work with other regenerative organic vineyards. We work with the Regenerative Organic Alliance to try to spread the word. I know that they have done some new partnerships with some big retailers, including Whole Foods, to do regenerative organic sections in grocery stores that have displays talking about what regenerative farming is and why it matters. But it's a process, we're still early in that process. I mean, given that when we got the call from the Regenerative Organic Alliance in 2019, like most of the team here didn't even know what regenerative meant. Like
Hmm.
it gives you a sense of how far we have to go.
Sure. Wow. Hmm.
And it'll be a process. It'll be a process for a long time. I think at the very least, though, people have this idea that regenerative is a good thing, and even if they don't know the specifics, like that'll come.
Yeah. Well, Jason Haas, thank you so much for the work you've done and for being leaders in ROC, which, pardon the fun, in my mind makes you rock stars. Get it? ROC, yeah. In the wine world and elsewhere.
I
So
see
thank
what
you
you
so
did
much.
there.
I was like waiting for my chance to say it. But no, we so appreciate you coming back
I
on Sip
know.
Sip Hooray and
And
explaining
I,
all this to us.
yeah. And I just want to mention that when you see a bottle of Tablas Creek, just look at the side label and you will see the regenerative organic certified symbol along with the CCOF, which is the California Certified Organic Farm um, symbol as well. So you know you're getting a wine that has been made with these processes in mind.
Yeah, and you know all the work that's gone into it and the love behind it too. So you can feel good about it.
Thanks. And I do think that you mentioned how do we educate people. I do think part of it is having that certification on the label. I
Mm-hmm.
sometimes get the question from people like, does certification really matter, or is it just the farming that matters? And I think the certification matters for 2 reasons. One, well, maybe even 3 reasons. One, it's sort of it gives you a community that you're a part of, which is great for information exchange and working together. It means that you have a third-party audit that is really saying this is not just lip service, but instead it's being really practiced and not just preached. And then finally, you can put that logo on a bottle, and that logo itself will help encourage people to ask questions and spread at least the curiosity about what it is. So I think that logo that you point out on the bottle, I think it's a really important thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And hopefully we'll see more wines in the future with that label.
Absolutely.
Or that symbol on the label.
Yeah.
I hope so too.
Yeah, great. All right, Jason. Well, we know you're a busy person, so thank you so much for coming back on the pod. And Earth Day's coming up. We're looking forward to all the celebrations, and everybody keep Regenerative Organic certified in mind and look for it and ask for it and start asking your retailers and if you're winery club members, and let them know you're interested in this and you want to see more of this.
All right, Jason. Well, thanks again. We appreciate the time.
Anytime.
Right.
You're so welcome.
So good to talk with you again.
Thank you, Marys.
Sip, sip, hooray.
Cheers.
I so appreciate all the work that Tablas Creek does to be good operators. It really resonates with me that they care enough to go the extra mile to make sure that they're doing the right things for the planet and the people that work with them, and even the farm animals. I just love it. And I think in this day and age, we're all looking for things to embrace and reasons to buy one product over another. And so I feel like this regenerative certification is a big deal.
Absolutely. And, Tablas Creek has always been so generous with their experience and their knowledge and sharing it with the community, not only in Paso Robles, but in the international grape community. They are a leader. They will continue to lead, and they set such a great example. And the wines are absolutely delicious. And, even the price point on the wines, you would think for all the work, all the certification work that they do, the way they farm, you would think that, their wines are going to be super expensive, and they really are not. So they are a great value, great for the earth. And just, as I said, absolutely delicious.
Yeah, you can taste the difference in your glass. Well, we hope you enjoyed this edition of Sip Sip Hooray. We sure love bringing it to you, and we thank you so much for listening. And we hope on whatever podcast platform that you're listening, you'll take just a second or two and give us a rating or a comment, and follow us, share it with your friends. All those little tiny little steps really help us a lot.
They absolutely do. We'll put show notes about this episode on our website at sipsiphooraypodcast.com, and also on our Substack. Sign up for our Substack. It's free, and you will get an email notification every time we drop a new episode. And, we're on social at Sip Sip Hooray Podcast, so follow us, leave us a comment, share your stories. If you've had any wines from Tablas Creek that you've really enjoyed, or you've experienced anything with regenerative agriculture, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mary Orland, that's going to do it for us. Hope you have a great afternoon, and cheers to you.
Cheers to you. Sip, sip, hooray.
Sip, sip, hooray.